The coronavirus pandemic has put life as we know it on hold. It has disrupted what we have accepted as the normal and has set the stage for a new reality. This pandemic has revealed the flaws in our systems, leading to discussions of new economies, social justice, and ecological accountability that would have been dismissed as left wing fantasies a few months ago. And there is no reason for change to stop here. For every poison, there is an antidote. At Fearless, we are excited to launch our first online campaign responding to this moment of global fear and trauma. We are conducting a series of workshops to collaboratively use our imaginations and envision the future world that we'd like to live and love in. We are looking for long-term emotional, personal, spiritual, systemic cures. We are doing this by bringing together activists, artists, practitioners, thinkers, and writers who are innovating in their fields. Fearless founder Shiloh and a co-host will guide panelists through collectively reimagining our future worlds. Our fourth and final workshop was on health, care, and healing. In this time of pandemic, how can we decolonize and reimagine new systems that help us care and heal? What tools and techniques do we employ to make these systems equitable and accessible?
So, welcome and thank you for joining us for this Fearless Antidote session on healthcare and healing. And just to kind of set the tone, we wanted to start by sharing a story with you. So, this is a Kannada story that I heard recently, and I'm just going to tell you the beginning of it. Um, but it starts off in a time once upon a time. And then there was a king who had only one son. So once, for reasons I couldn't fathom, snakes increased in the kingdom and caused a lot of havoc. The young prince decided to look into the matter himself and fight the snakes. One day, after hunting and killing hundreds of snakes in the nearby forest, he rested under a tree and he fell asleep. The soldiers who had gone with him were all surrounding him. They were all looking at him. And just then, this great big snake, the seven-hooded snake, began to descend from the branches of the tree under which the prince was sleeping. The soldiers caught sight of it, drew their swords, and were about to cut it to pieces when the prince woke up and his eyes fell on the seven-hooded snake above him. The snake looked at him eye to eye, and there was a look of great pain in its eyes. The prince asked his soldiers to do nothing, but to step back. And then he addressed the snake directly. He said, "O king of snakes, what do you want?" It replied in a human voice with human words and said, for 7 long years, I've had a terrible headache. I haven't been able to attend to my duties as a king, and I haven't been able to lead my subjects. They're running amok and creating havoc wherever they go. So the prince said, "Can we do something about your headache?" The snake said, "If you go 7 mountains to the south of your kingdom, you'll come to a kingdom. The princess is an only daughter of the king there, and she weighs only as much as 7 blossoms of jasmine. She's never laughed, and when she does, 3 jasmine flowers will fall from her mouth. If you can bring me the middle one of the 3, and if I can smell its fragrance, my headache will vanish. Then I promise you, I'll see to it that your kingdom will never more be troubled by my snakes." The prince said, "So it shall be," and set out for the journey that very moment. So we want to start the workshop with this old folk story, because it tells us something about healthcare and healing. It tells us that sometimes we need to look beyond the symptoms to identify the source of our wounds, and that being able to see that needs empathy and understanding sometimes, and of course that finding cures often requires a long journey and a leap of the imagination, which is exactly what we gathered here to do today in this workshop. So today we're here to talk about health, care, and healing, and we're looking for these long-term emotional, personal, spiritual, systemic cures to our current systems. So just to give you a little backdrop on the workshop itself, so this series came up as our response to the situation that we find ourselves in right now in this pandemic. And really the incredible fear that a lot of people are experiencing right now, which as the pandemic was unfolding and we were kind of learning about this virus and what it is, we found that the media was actually doing more harm than good and kind of amplifying the fear that we're experiencing right now with sensationalized numbers and facts and figures more than we could keep track of. And of course, all the uncertainty around this virus, how it came up very suddenly, you know. But then when we look at our healthcare systems, when it comes to healthcare in particular, this has always been the story, because a lot of the information that we receive about health and wellness often does more to increase our fears than it does to help us see past them. We use language that treats our bodies as vulnerable, as wounded, as battlegrounds, rather than as resilient. And while we've been taught to pay attention to ourselves, body and mind, when we are unwell or when we're in pain, we kind of started to ask, we started to wonder, what would healthcare systems look like if we communicated with our bodies just as much in times of wellness? Our hospitals are most often sites of illness rather than places we go to amplify wellness or to flourish and grow. A lot of modern medicine neglects or ignores or dismisses entirely traditional systems of healing. So the kind of questions that started to come up were in this time of pandemic, how can we really kind of decolonize and reimagine and create new healthcare systems, tools and techniques? So we kind of look towards a methodology that Shiloh and some other people in the Fearless Collective developed 3 years ago, called Fearless Futures, which I'll let Shiloh talk about a little bit right now and introduce.
For those of you who know or don't know the Fearless Collective, we began in 2012, and a lot of our work is about self-representation in public space. We work with communities of women, particularly women who've experienced some sort of gender-based violence, or women who have been marginalized in some way. And we use ritual ceremony to take them through deeply immersive processes where we tell our own stories. And then from there, we create these huge public monuments to a lot of these communities and their stories. Like this, for example, was created with a community of sex workers in Indonesia, and she lays across a mosque in Indonesia. This was one of the first queer monuments in Beirut to the queer community there. This was in Tunisia, also with the queer community in Tunisia. This was in Victoria, BC, with a group of indigenous medicine women as well as South Asian migrants there, and it was really focusing on decolonizing healing. And while the work that we do in public space is so fulfilling and also so layered, we found ourselves in this weird position where very often people who were involved in activism would look at art as if it was like this glittering insect, like something that was like, does art really help social justice movements? Almost something quite additive, as opposed to really looking at how, when as artists we create, not only are we creating, but we're also reclaiming imagination from fear. And this source and this access that we have to our imagination is a deep resource for us. And so we began to develop this methodology, which kind of stripped away art and activism as just being this additive thing, and instead really reclaim the imagination to create new futures. It presented itself as this 140-foot map, which had an entire universe, an entire future world on it. And in that future world, there were libraries for future knowledge systems. There were future bazaars, which had which represented future economies. There were future homes for future relationships, a future temple for future spiritual spaces, a future hospital, and so on and so forth. And we gathered together with 1,800 intergenerational feminist activists and actively recited a new world into existence. Very often, especially in our movements, we know what we don't want, but we don't know how to articulate what we do want. Within the space of health and wellness, for example, we know very well how to articulate illness, but we don't really know what wellness looks like. We don't affirm wellness as much. So it came from that space of wanting to construct a world that wasn't just in reaction to the systems that we fight, but was actually something that we wanted to inhabit, a safe and sacred space that we wanted to create. What would borders and security, for example, look like if not for the fear of around borders? What would healthcare look like if not for war and illness? And those were the questions we began to ask. A question I've been asking myself a lot lately, even just personally, is how would I react and how would I be if the wound didn't exist? If our childhood trauma didn't exist, if all of those marauding exes didn't exist, how would we be able to love? How would we be able to heal? And while the wound does exist for so many of us, simultaneously it's important for us to hold the image of that unwounded space so we know what it looks like and we know what we're working towards.
And Maliha, you can tell us a bit about your practice, and in particular the work you do around both therapy as a doctor, but art therapy in particular, and how you bring art into the work that you do.
Sounds great. I've just been so overcome hearing everybody, and I'm just sort of still soaking that in. Thank you so much. If it's okay, Gayu, I'd like to just share my screen really quickly and take you through a little bit of my journey. Thank you so much, Fearless Collective, for having me as a co-host. I'm Maliha, and I'm currently based in Bangalore. I use she, her pronouns. So I'm a bit of a restless person and, a bit of a wanderer. So I'm going to take you through the next few minutes to tell you my journey also as a practitioner, but also with play and with imagining. Mental health researcher, therapist, healer, activist. This is who I am, I guess, or maybe this is who I have become. Bit by bit, year after year, inching along slowly. A person always in progress. Not to say that I don't believe in destiny and a purpose for all of us, but I'm convinced deep in my heart that we are a product of our surroundings, thus constantly changing, forever transforming. It is both our circumstances and our societies that do break us, marginalization and injustice often flowing freely, but I found that community is what also builds us and heals us. So I try to spend my days focusing on the healing, reminding myself and those I witness in my practices that well-being is a shared experience. Not simply ours to curate for ourselves alone as we sort of suffer in our self-responsibility and the idea of maintaining sanity, but instead that we learn so much when we share our vulnerability and some of the insanity in the world around us. Not so that we burden others, but because it quickly dissipates amidst all that's positive and possible around us. For more immediate context, I'm working currently on, in this sort of COVID era, on school-based mental health and how we can actually connect children, teenagers and their families in ways that actually support one another and find connection together. And I'm also working on a participatory research project about resilience building in times of religious fascism and politicized control. So this project is between India, the Philippines, Brazil, and the US. I'm so grateful to be here today, and thank you for witnessing me. I look forward to ideating and sharing together.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Maliha. And firstly, that was incredibly poetic as an introduction.
Thank you. I just put it together before getting on this call. Thank you.
And actually, so much of what you said completely speaks to what we've all gathered here to do today, which is imagine a totally new future with totally new systems of health, care, and healing, rooted in everything all of you do. And can I also just say, kind of echoing what Anjali is saying, this was unintentional, by the way. I did not mean to invite a group of entirely women, but it is so lovely to see so many women talking about the future of healthcare and healing in so many places from the Global South in particular. So again, thank you all for your introductions and thank you for being here with us. So just to give you a sense of what the workshop is going to be like for the next hour and a half or so, is we are hoping to collectively kind of imagine and create glimpses of a future in which health, care, and healing embodies all the things we would want it to, So this is a dream tanks of sorts where we're going to come up with future remedies, future hospitals, future methodologies, manifestos, healing rituals, and more. So in order to do that though, the first thing that we need to do is start by suspending some of the disbeliefs that we have around healthcare and healing. So often when we look at our systems, it's very easy for us to see the flaws in them, and in all of our movements for social justice, whether it be disability rights, whether it be gender rights, whether it be questions of untouchability, it's really easy for us to articulate the things that we don't want, but often we find it more difficult to talk about the things that we do want. So with this workshop, we always start with this exercise of suspending all our current realities. So this involves, just for a second, willingly putting aside all of our critical thinking to make it possible for us to believe the unbelievable, if only for a moment. And this is kind of drawing on what it looks like when we imagine as children. So when we're children, it's really easy for us to say, look at that cloud in the sky. It's a ship, let's go. And often when we're playing these games of imagination, our friend won't look at us and say, no, that's absolutely stupid. It's impossible. You're being too idealistic. Clouds cannot be ships. Often our friends will just look at us and say, yeah, let's go. Where are we traveling to? So in this moment, reality is transcended, a threshold is broken, and we enter a new world, a new universe. And what's really beautiful about this is children who are engaged in imagining together, they can see this new reality together. But childhood dream worlds are not the only times we engage in these collective acts of imagination. We've often found that love is an act of imagination between individuals who form commitments to each other. Countries are collectively imagined and reinforced with national songs, flags, and symbols. People press their foreheads to the ground and circle around mountains in prayer. Laws are written like spells. Collective imagination crystallizes into belief systems and then forms our institutions. So I guess this workshop is kind of our opportunity to reclaim this collective act of imagining and create new systems for future world. But before we do that, I want us to take a moment to suspend a current disbelief you have about wellness and institutional healthcare. So what is one belief or current reality that you want to completely let go of before we step into our new future? Maliha, do you want to start us off?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think probably institutional care is one that I want to, because it gets reinforced all the time, but I want to suspend my belief around that.
I could jump in. I think one belief that, one reality that I'd really like to suspend is just the access to wellness and health and care, that it's so hierarchical.
I'll add to that because it's similar to what Gayu said, but to suspend the disbelief that healthcare and access to healthcare is not a right, that it's a privilege as it is now. And I want to be in a reality where everybody has equitable access to good healthcare.
I would like to not imagine that there is a cure. I mean, the assumption is that there is no cure.
To suspend the current reality that we're always fighting against death and that we don't embrace that sometimes we die.
I'm going to say that the belief that the system has always been set up to keep us sick.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in. What Navi is saying is I want to suspend the reality that traditional systems of medicine and healthcare will always be dismissed or ignored, or the only way that they'll gain legitimacy is if they're kind of appropriated and marketed under capitalist medical schemes and taken away from the land-based context that they actually belong within.
So I would like to suspend the reality that women are not believed when they tell their symptoms.
One belief that really does need to be suspended for me would be is the power of food as medicine, and away from it being a trend and to actually being truth. That's a really important access point that I think needs to be changed.
Yeah, current reality, I would like to just add to that is also there's a way that I think, particularly the way that we've been colonized, makes us feel that a lot of more spiritual, intergenerational, even constellation work, like our ancestors have been doing this for hundreds of years in the form of rituals and ceremonies, and then some white guy goes and sees like Zulu tribes and makes it into a fancy sounding constellation therapy thing that then becomes legitimized. So I'm in a place where I'm sick of seeing things that have come quite naturally to our ancestral communities be legitimized because they're suddenly being given white backing, or is being spoken in the language that the white world understands.
One thing that I would like to suspend is that pleasure cannot be centered, that belief, but it can be. And I think sometimes what happens with pleasure and joy and orgasmic healing, it can be kind of something that's extra, when it could be so central to many people's healing, as it was in my own journey. And another thing that is so important is when I think about, tantra and pleasure healing, and I know some other people mentioned it as well in terms of integrating pleasure as a part of healing work, is the colonization of pleasure work and the colonization of tantra, and also the commodification of it, and seeing that and knowing that it can be de-commodified, knowing that it can be deeper spiritualized and connected back to its essence, and connected back as well as nourished and revitalized, so it can be reimagined as well. So really allowing pleasure to be centered, and knowing that we can have this reimagining of healing modalities once they've been kind of commodified and affected in these ways by capitalism, by racism, and by different systems, and casteism as well. So another thing I wanted to add, I didn't get to share this earlier, but something that's very important is that Tantra has these anti-casteist roots, and also has matriarchal roots as well in South Asia, that it has this history of being rebellious, this history of being expansive and not limited, and also very much about oral tradition and fluidity, and gender expansiveness, and sexual fluidity as well. So there's just so much beauty and expansiveness that gets hidden when things get commodified, when whiteness dominates, and that's very essential. So knowing that we can center what we want to center, and that we can reclaim, and that we can reimagine far beyond what we think is there, which is very much what the theme of this beautiful conversation is about. So, yeah.
I'd like to suspend the reality where we are made to believe that we are not whole. So there's something wrong with us inherently, or we are broken. And related to that, how our stories are not important or powerful enough, because sometimes the mere act of sharing produces a change that is powerful enough for us to move forward and like truly transform our lives. So I would like to suspend that reality.
I'd actually like to suspend the reality, and this has happened to a friend of mine, where once he had to go to a mental health institution, and instead of making him better, they treated him so badly that it ended up making him worse. So I feel like the amount of trust we put in these places, and then sometimes they do let us down, and it could end up making us worse. So I want to suspend that.
I just add one more thing. I think suspend the reality that we as human beings cannot trust our gut. If 90% of our brain is within our gut, we do know what we need. So to be able to build a narrative where that is valued, and suspending the current that is not.
A fearless project that I was doing a bit of research on, but that saying, our gut feeling, our gut instinct, actually comes from the fact that aside from our brain, our gut has the most, what is it, Anjali? The most sensory receptors in our body. But unlike our brain, our gut doesn't have the capacity to second guess.
No.
So it's literally the center of sensation is our gut, which is so connected.
I think your gut has the sensory receptors of like 5 or 6 football fields. That size.
Which is wild.
It's way bigger than our brain, what it has. So your gut's usually right.
Suspend this reality that like this magical vaccine is the cure that we're all waiting for. Because I think that there are much bigger conversations, including this one today, that need to be happening around more systemic antidotes to things like this, around the interconnectedness of us, around our integration with the natural world. But instead, so much of the conversation is being focused on this one magical vaccine that everybody's fighting for, which is also then tied up with a huge economic race between the countries. And so I want to suspend that reality completely and say it's not even about the vaccine. There's a bigger conversation that needs to happen here.
So I want to suspend the reality that medicine, allopathy or homeopathy is always the cure for your health. Because I think people in India, and especially in Southeast Asia, they focus especially on the medicines and the sedatives. When I was in the hospital, so they always used to focus on the medicine part. That's why I wasn't getting better, because they never believed in therapy or going out for a walk or anything, yoga or anything. They just want to give you medicines all the time. And the thing is that mental health is also related to politics. Mental health is individual as well as related to the community that we live in. So we have to, level it to the community to make it affordable for the communities that cannot afford it, and to make people, aware of the situation that a community faces. It is also important for the individual, but also for a community. And the belief that an adult can never be a child again. You can be a child. Like, why cannot you be a child? I love being a child. Adult doesn't mean immature. Those labels are added in it that you cannot be immature, you have responsibilities, everything. I love to be a child again. I love living this life as a child. I don't want to be an adult. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe just to piggyback, it's sort of what some of you have been saying, but sort of suspend this belief that when I'm going to access health services, I'm exhibiting symptoms that need to be fixed. But often the symptoms are our body's way of telling us bigger things. They're not necessarily like one bad thing that needs to be fixed, but it's a messenger, and that we should sort of value, and it's like a symptom can be a very precious message rather than something that needs to be fixed.
I'd like to suspend the reality that, this is Raji, that activism work and, community work has to be this very crisis-based, stressful work. I think that's one of the other ways that capitalism kind of dupes us into doing this work. And I think it should be grounded in pleasure, and it needs joy and, food and celebration.
To jump in and suspend a reality which tells us that there are certain emotions that are bad or negative, like anger, anxiety, and there's certain that are positive. Emotions are what they are. So just, seeing it for what it is and not labeling everything immediately as a weakness or as negative, and just probably suspend our judgments. And I think it ties into what everybody else is also saying about, listening to the white man and pill popping and all of that, so we are not broken. So yeah.
I'm just going to also add something. I'd like to suspend the reality that as women, that we, if we make time or room for rest, that it's rooted in either weakness or selfishness, and especially as South Asian women, that it means that you're not being a caretaker for your family, especially if you have children or you have partners. That belief that we have to continually use our bodies as a means to not just create life, but sustain it for others. And that our health and well-being comes last, and instead of prioritizing it from the get-go, so that we can show up better for ourselves first and then everyone else around us.
I feel like when it comes to health and healing and trauma and healthcare and medicines and hospitals, like it's so deep that actually there are multiple layers and multiple realities that need to be completely burned to the ground. But one of those last ones would also be, I think, particularly when the separation of mental health from physical health, from spiritual health. I feel like that is actually really problematic. And some of the ways that a lot of traditional, especially Western psychology, treats illness, mental illness, I find really disgusting. Just the language around it itself, the syndromes and the even like, you know, words like even survivor of sexual abuse. I feel like it actually, there's an attachment that comes with any of those words. And so how does one give something a language and give something a name, be it depression, anxiety, survivor, abuse, trauma, but without creating an attachment to the wound that is actually more destructive.
Without treating the body as a wound.
Without treating the body, yeah.
Was vulnerable.
Or people as broken.
Or people as broken. Or like Zara said, needing to be whole. Oh, sorry, Tani said needing to be whole. Yeah. To suspend. Can everybody just turn off their screens for 1 second? We will absolutely let go of all of these realities, and they don't exist. Okay, so now that we've suspended all these disbeliefs, we will not carry these into our new futures, and instead we will turn our cameras back on and start the work of articulating the healthcare systems that we actually want to build, that we actually want to create. So the first question, and I think a lot of you have already spoken to this in what you've said so far in your introductions, but now that we're on our new future, what heals you? So in this new reality where none of these things exist, what is the thing that heals you? So we'll do a quick round, and then what we're going to do is we're going to break into a few separate groups and actually try to come up with plans to build these systems, to build these new futures. So Gayu, do you want to jump in and start off with what heals you?
Hi. This is a tricky one, actually. I thought a little, I couldn't think of like one way to articulate this when we were thinking about this earlier as well. But I'd say just like having a conversation with someone I love very much, and just reminds me of things I guess I lose sight of when I'm not thinking straight enough.
Yeah, no, I really connect with what Gayu was saying, and just kind of witnessing others, being witnessed, and sort of sharing. That's what heals me.
Like being around like my animals, like my pets, I feel like that has such a healing like quality. Just sitting around them, like they can sense when you're feeling down. Like my dog always comes and sits by my feet whenever he realizes I'm in a little bit of a low mood. So I don't know, there's something really magical about that.
Actually, for me, when something happens, I just like need to cry it out, like properly, like really badly, ugly cry, just let it all out. And then I feel so much better afterwards that I can sort of move on from that moment. So that really helps.
Oh my God, Haneem, I can totally identify with you. It's like a running joke with anybody who knows me. I feel like anything all the time, like all emotions also, like sadness, happiness, pain, joy, like best.
Putting on like a really sad film so I can cry with it, that also helps. So
yeah, so what heals me is owning my own emotions. Like whenever I'm feeling sad, I'll cry talking to my friends. Whenever I'm feeling low or happy, I'll just express it out as much as I can. I won't suppress them, I'll own it. So I think that is what heals me the most. like owning your emotions all the time. I mean, do whatever you want to do all the time. Just be happy or cry in between the road. I do that because I just want to express it. I mean, not expressing them makes me feel bad. And for my mental health, it's very bad. Like, it doesn't soothe me or heals me if I don't express my emotions. Yeah.
That's beautiful. And I'll actually jump in and I'll talk about what heals me. So what heals me right now is literally the people who surround me. So I forgot to tell you where I'm calling from. So I'm based in Kodaikanal in Tamil Nadu in South India. And I live in the forest in an Adivasi settlement. And yeah, what heals me is the people around me. So in the past few months during the lockdown, every time I've become ill or gotten sick or fallen down or hurt myself, there have always been a community of people who are coming with land-based, plant-based traditional remedies. And the reason that Hinakshi made me think of this as healing for me is I've learned a lot from the rituals and ceremonies that people perform here as acts of collective care. And recently, in particular, ceremonies around death. And one of the ceremonies around death here is called the Nirmala, which means the water garland. And during the water garland, people express every and any emotion that comes to them, almost in a way that's extremely performative. So after someone's passing in this place, people will dance and people will laugh and children will be running around and crying and people will be eating food and people will also be weeping and people will also get angry and people will start fighting and hitting each other and be absolutely enraged. But the point is the space of the Nirmala is a space where you feel what you feel and you express it uninhibitedly. And that is the way that people heal from grief and kind of confront death and healing in this space. So right now, this is what is healing me, is learning about these acts of collective care performed in rituals and ceremony, and just the fact that they exist and people remember them and people still practice them.
I think time, just when I'm completely in alignment with nature around me and I'm one step behind nature, so I'm really slow. That for me, and that's not like being in sort of a meditation or like sitting or like vipassana, it's just being able, and when a system that allows me to be still and slow and just being within my thoughts, like that is sort of the most healing thing, because it's sort of like it sort of validates my mind, which speed doesn't do. So that's amazing.
So what helps me heal is very much about intimacy with myself and intimacy with others, and a deep, raw intimacy with myself and others, and especially intimacy and connection with other queer femmes, and really allowing myself to connect on really authentic and deep levels. So that's something that's definitely healed me, and as well as connecting to my essence, connecting to my inner vibrations of love, connecting to the love vibrations of others as well. And I think tantric work has really helped me in accessing this and accessing my inner essence, and has really shaped how I relate to others and my interpersonal connections, as well as connecting to my inner erotic, my inner sensations, my inner connections to earth, water, fire, air, and also building those connections with nature, with loved ones, with divine people in my life, with all the divinities in my life, with friends, and really allowing for this sensuality to be abundant in my life as well as in my connections. And that has been really fruitful and healing, and just releasing shame around that and releasing any shame or any barriers, and really opening up this spaciousness and this space of surrender to ecstasy, and surrender to joy, and surrender to even other emotions like anger and different things, and allowing different emotions to coexist, is this feeling of melting and this feeling of surrender. So that's definitely something that has helped, is allowing things to be lush, allowing sensuality to be lush and expansive within myself, especially, and allowing it to ripple, and allowing it to also, just deepen my embodiment and connection to my senses and connection to my earthliness as well, and the divine, that's the divine love within. So just another thing that's coming to mind is also making sure to receive, and not having a balance of giving and receiving, and not depleting myself. And that has been really, really nurturing, is the nourishment of the sensual self.
I think as we were having this conversation about healing, like I was also thinking about how often, like being a cis, like Brahmin person, the idea of healing, like my own healing, is coming at the cost of like other folks, with a lot of, you know, how structurally things are set up. So I think like just being mindful of that as well. And also, I mean, taking account of like that we sort of haven't figured out, at least like I haven't figured it out. Like, I don't know, I think it was just bringing up these like feelings in me, like when we were talking about, you know, what is healing, because it's like, I think that is just always like the accountability aspect of it is always like connected, and it's difficult and it's messy. Yeah.
Raji, I'll just jump in and add, I think that's really beautiful. That being accountable itself can be a form of healing, when a lot of us through colonization, we've been put through so many histories where we've been pitted against each other. You know, as women, we've been taught to compete with each other, as people in different social classes and castes and all those kind of things. I mean, there have been, and communities, and ethnically and racially and all these things, we have had histories of being pitted against each other. So being accountable to our histories and to each other, I think is a very, very beautiful articulation of healing.
Everything everyone has said so far, it's bringing up some emotions for sure, because I'm thinking of like all the ways we rob ourselves of healing because it's something that is not accessible, or we're shamed for, or is something that maybe we don't feel worthy of. So I just want to take a moment that my ugly cry might come sooner than I thought. So, but for me, it's always connecting with a few things, and ancestral wisdom and ritual is a big thing, because I feel like it connects me a lot to the divine feminine aspects. And growing up in the West and being the oldest in my family, there's been a lot more focus on how to have that masculine energy in order to just survive and get through life. So the life has always been focused on that versus like the vulnerability, the softness, the creativity, the sensuality. Those things have to be learned or relearned. So I find that ritual, things like dance or, you know, movement, music, singing, all those things bring that up for me. And then healing with a group of like intergenerational women. And being okay expressing the range of emotions. So, I mean, like when I'm with my grandma and my mom and my sisters, it's so nourishing for me, but also for me requires a lot of work because they're not always ready to express what they're really feeling and being vulnerable about it. So for me, it would be so healing if everyone was okay just bringing their shit to the table, whether that's crying or laughing, instead of it being repressed or reserved. And I really push my family to do it. So it's healing for me, but maybe triggering for them because I'm always slowly pushing them to express those things about themselves. So I think, again, with that storytelling comes in for me. I find a lot of healing comes in through when, on the rare occasion, my grandma slips up and decides she's going to go into storytelling about her life. And then my mom will join in, and seeing the humanness about them, and then being able to connect where certain things in my life, whether that's things that I really love about myself or things that I maybe don't love so much, or patterns or thought processes that I have, you can see where they come from. And as much as sometimes I know in the West, like, we really like to separate ourselves, and there's a very big focus on being so individualistic, and in society, it's very much based on being an individual and exercising yourself as an individual. But seeing the beauty of like our lineage and like how much of that comes from there, and not just our trauma. There's a lot of talk right now about intergenerational trauma, but not so much about like our gifts that also come, our healing, our magic that comes from the intergenerational. So yeah, there's so much there that brings healing, but I would have to say it's always about being in connection to community where we can be our true selves without judgment, deeper connection to, you know, whether that's your real family or your soul family, chosen family, just having more vulnerability and there being acceptance for everyone showing up as they are.
That's very beautiful. And it actually reminds me of this phrase that's spoken a lot in Sufi music and poetry, but just to say that I am perfection and I am lack, and it's possible to be both things at the same time, you know. So to be able to look at our lineages and see the wound and see the trauma, but also see this lineage of bounty, of gift, of abundance that we carry with us, which also reminds me of something like what heals us. Our bodies heal us, which is something I forgot, and that's something that also comes from that beautiful ancestral abundant lineage that we all carry with us. Bono, I would actually love to hear from you about this question of what heals you, having had so much experience kind of working in public health, and like you said, in spaces that are both at the policy level and very much at the grassroots community level. But personally, what heals you?
Yeah, so as I'm hearing all of you speak, you know, I have 20 years on you guys, so life experiences have brought me to a space which I think what heals me primarily is when I am in service of others, and and not of my family or immediate. Like, these are when I am in service of people that I may never see again. That is my most healing space. And as far as you know, you're talking about lineages and all, and as I find that especially for South Asian women, so much of our trauma and so much of our you know, our messed up heads is because of the conditioning. And so what heals me is, you know, it goes against some of what you have said, is putting up boundaries where I take back my space. I'm like, you know what, enough with this bullshit. I don't care if this is our tradition. It is regressive. It's regressive towards women mostly. And I have learned to take back that space. And I don't care if it's my grandmother, if it's my mother, I put up boundaries, and I have just learned to say no. And that's how I heal. And, you know, and the other thing I do is I just space out. I forget. And there's just too much nonsense, especially for South Asian women, that we have to deal with on an everyday basis. And yes, the Western society is very individualistic, but it gives women the space to actually be ourselves. And I appreciate that about being in the West. And it has taught me to now take back that space when I am in India. Because I feel badly for, you know, my friends. They don't have that space. We can talk all about it, but that
space to be yourself and be free to act and to think does not exist. And so we really have to take back that space, and that's how I have created that space for me. And it puts me at odds with my family, the women in my family, my mother, my friends, but that's okay. I heal by being by myself and being comfortable with who I am, who I have become, and owning it, and not making excuses for anything. And I don't know if that makes sense or not, but that's what 50 years has taught me.
I think it makes absolute sense, and I'm so grateful that you shared this with us. Because something I've been thinking a lot about lately is also the way that we talk about the body, and especially during this pandemic, the metaphors that are being used is always treating the body as this battleground, and a virus or an illness is something that we have to fight or combat or defeat or whatever it is. But what if we started thinking about the body more as a nation? A nation where, like you said, we could draw those own boundaries, where we could choose which are the traditions that serve us and which are the traditions that no longer serve us, that we can do without in the nation of our own body, in the nation of ourselves, which also speaks to what you were saying earlier about agency in healthcare and health systems. So I think it's really, it is a really, really valuable kind of piece of discernment in saying, yes, our traditions are absolutely beautiful, but there are some traditions, especially as women from the global south, that do not serve us. And we have the autonomy and we have the agency to throw those away, because that is how culture has always worked. And that's also where the imagination comes in. So thank you for that.
I think I have a very difficult relationship with healing in general. I struggle a lot. And one thing definitely I have been doing in the last few years, and I'm taking with what Bono was saying, that making boundaries and refusing to be there for anybody else healing. So that's the first act of selfishness I have ever practiced as a woman. So that was liberating. But I find it still very confusing. I still don't understand what am I doing with. So what little I have understood is that I'm not hurting anymore. That's the only thing I have felt. And I think so animals and nature, that's something during pandemic I realized, just being around trees, just walking on the grass, touching grass, and being around animals, dogs, cats, whatever animals I have around. That in a weird way, I learned a lot of healing concepts from looking at them, like how were they so relaxed. I'm a very tense soul in general. So that was interesting to learn. But again, I don't know. I find healing, even still as a concept, extremely difficult. So still struggling with it.
My practice teaches me that death is always there anyway. So if death is imminent and death is the only certainty that you have, it's actually the most healing thing, because everything else is uncertain. Death is uncertain. So what you do in this moment is, it's uncertain, but you're just doing it anyway. And as nihilistic as that seems, I think that humanizes the whole act of healing for me, because I will break sometimes, I will heal sometimes, and I will fail. But if I know that death is the biggest thing, then everything else is just day by day healing and growing. So just thought I'd let you know that.
I think that's a really beautiful note to end this part of the session on. And so there was this Vietnamese poet who migrated to America, and he does a particular form of Buddhist death meditation, which basically involves exactly what you're talking about, is confronting death and accepting that death is on your doorstep at any particular moment. And that forced him to ask this question is, how do you live a life then that is worth your breath? If breath is a thing that we've been given and death is inevitable, then how do we treat that breath? How do we live a life that's worth it? So on that note, we are now going to split in half, and we're going to jump into 2 breakout rooms, and we are going to try to come up with new systems that really embody all of these things that we really want healing and care to be. Okay, hello, welcome back everybody. So we're pushing on kind of the end of our session right now. So just to wrap everything up really quickly, it would be wonderful if somebody from each group could share some of the ideas that you came up with in your breakout session.
Mali, would you like to sort of start? I mean, something we could all pitch in.
Yeah, I'd love that. I'll share what I remember, but please do pitch in. Okay, so we were talking about healing spaces, and we started with that, and then kind of came back to it, and ideas around it being open and a wilderness space in being layered, kind of like an onion, where there would be different dimensions, and so you could move back and forth between being with others and being on your own, something that's co-created and is same and dynamic. It's changing in its shape but still accountable. We talked about it being a space where it honors your pace in healing, so we don't have to worry about kind of keeping pace as we do often in the outside world, or say. Yeah, did I miss anything? A place of magic and wonderment, and yeah.
Wonderful. So the creation of a healing space that's multi-layered.
I was just going to add that I think like the idea of the garden came up a lot, no? And this idea of like watching natural cycles and how closely connected we are to them, and that these same cycles are within us. So how that's really important in our healing process as well, is that we witness growth and death both within and without us, and that it's a participative process, the process of healing.
From our group can kind of jump in and say some of the ideas that came up and kind of the point that we're reaching.
I think one thing that we sort of came through mid-conversation is a fundamental right to dream. And everybody in our groups talked about this ability to build a new system of health and well-being and access, is that everybody should get. Just hearing a lot of feedback. Oh.
Yeah, could everyone put themselves on mute, because I think someone is having an echo going on in the background.
Is that better?
Yeah, perfect.
So it was the idea that in order to build a new system, there needs to be equal access and equal ability for everybody to dream. And there's multiple ways in which people can dream, but in order to really dream, we first have to start dreaming for ourselves and recognize, sorry, I'm going to go through my notes, to recognize that the dreams that we have can become a reality, and it starts with ourselves. And Barno put it really well. She says it's a lot of talk happening across levels when we talk about this subject, but it's about walking the walk and not just talking the talk. So if we dream for ourselves, and with the hope that when we live that dream for ourselves, that extends through the work that we do, and we can also provide that opportunity in our capacity to the communities around us to also dream for themselves. And with the hope that that creates itself a sort of a trickle of dreams. You build these webs and nets of dreams around you where ideas start to flourish.
In our group, just the idea that to connect the idea of dreaming to actual policy making, because sometimes there's everyone's on their own respective sides, but in the world that we live in order to create systemic change, there has to be a bridge between the two. And we also touched on the fact that it's a challenge to a little bit to think about those systems as the present systems are falling apart, because anything is possible in many ways. And we have the potential to create new systems within ourselves rather than trying to become a part of those pre-existing systems or change those systems, is within these ripple effects of our dreams. Is if we integrate the policy making into it, we're creating new sustainable systems. But I think what was missing was we're still trying to figure out how to make that bridge between the policy making, systemic change, being able to dream big. Because there was some things that I came up with that, like, if I took that to policy making, they'd be like, you're insane, get the hell out of here. So just understanding how we can play all those roles. And like, one thing I wanted to add is, I'm not sure if anyone has seen this, it's like the roles in our ecosystems that's been going around. And I believe her name is, I'm going to pull it up right now, Deepa Iyer. And I really like this model, looking at the fact that we all play different roles at different times and they're constantly changing. And in order for that ripple effect or that system to be made, like in the middle, we have to have aligned core values in order for it to be successful and for it to make sense. Because a lot of the times when we come together in these groups, like, we have these visions, but we might not necessarily be energetically aligned, because our core values might not be aligned. And then the dreams kind of stay there. They don't actually translate into real change. So just something I wanted to put out there. It's called Mapping Our Roles in a Social Change Ecosystem. So yeah.
Yeah, and please share it with us. And I think that's actually a beautiful note to end on, is really saying, and because what you're describing about kind of articulating some core values, I feel is like exactly what we've done in the session by talking about what heals us, and, you know, really articulating that lush and whole, and as Maliha said at the beginning of the session, a state of healing where we are always constantly becoming and transforming, and if becoming ourselves, and that's it. So if that could be our manifesto, those could be our core values, and we could all kind of start to talk in our own spaces. What would our world look like 6 months from now, 1 year from now, 10 years from now, maybe, if it took that ripple and moved outwards. So on that note, I want to thank you all for taking 3 hours on this Friday night to join us and dive deep into this articulation of healing, healing in our future world.
Thank you for listening in. For updates and announcements, please do find us on Instagram at Fearless Collective. And for more information on our current campaign Antidote and the rest of our work, please visit our website www.fearlesscollective.org.